Welcome, everybody, to the Lone Wolf Show for a special live on social media on the Witchcraft TV platform. That's www.witchcrafttv.online. And I have with us a special guest, Sir Ed Hubbard. Ed Hubbard, how are things?
Good. I think that especially this Friday the 13th, honor the Templars and what had happened. I think it's a perfect sort of day. It's been fine weather, so I'm looking forward to this conversation.
As I am too. I wanted to have you on because there has been a press release with Carillion Press, and it has your book listed as Witch Wars Defense Manual Volume 2.
That's correct. That's a very exciting. Yeah. Yeah. It's the second volume, 20 years later from the first one. The first one has
So,
been available for a long time.
mhm. And I was reading that it a 500,000 downloads PDF.
Of the original? Yes.
Yes, and that's on
Uh,
a world stage. Downloads
uh,
worldwide.
that downloads worldwide over, like I said, a 20-year period. It's always been a word of mouth kind of thing. It's listed on a few websites. More or less, I let it go into public domain. They kind of you just kind of I didn't force it to copyrights and let it spread. In fact, that's what I wanted to happen. There's only 100 original copies, plus 3 or 4 prototypes of the actual physical book. It ended up being a all PDF book, the downloads, and free. So it makes it easy. Those numbers are sometimes deceptive because they're easy. They're easier. They're hard, but they're easier than people think.
I see. 20 years ago, what was the motive of the book then?
Oh, to stop a witch war that was happening
Stop a witch war.
against Corellian tradition. Every year, the Corellian tradition was in a witch war with one of the other groups, and this is where we were emerging into the internet. Facebook had now just is on the horizon. MySpace was out there, lots of groups, and they're still having all these fights inside these local groups as well as nationally. And I just got tired of it. So in a 10-day spite, I praised Eris. I did my rituals Eris and everybody did that. And I went on a coffee binge that anyone see it. And 10 days later, I wrote what is the Discordian manual, Witch Wars Defense Manual. And it did a lot of good. It shut down a lot of the conflicts because everybody then knew what they were dealing with. They were fighting each other and the tricks and the techniques. They were coming up. So I was able to reveal those, and they brought a lot of fights to an end.
So the motive of Witch Wars Defense Manual Volume 1 was defense in the landscape of a witch war.
And I didn't quite understand what that was meaning. I mean, I've learned a lot since then, but a third of it was sponsored to the book. If you read it, a third of it was dedicated directly to the Christian nationalist movement that we are facing today. Mm-hmm. We talked about Ralph Reed. We talked about all of that within the book. So it was much about defending ourselves against Christianity and the sort of movement of Christians across in 2005 that were really kind of Hubbard-esque. We were starting to see a little bit of a satanic panic. We were kind of merging with some of the shows on television. Harry Potter was doing really well. So, yeah. So we had that sort of energy happening with us. And so a third of that book is defending us against Christian nationals and explaining the movement that we're now caught in today.
Is the motive of the book number 2, volume 2, has the motive changed since 20 years ago?
No, not one bit. I mean, I don't change very much. People get mad at me and say, "Oh, you don't change your message much." If I listened to you 10 years ago, it's the same as now. That's right. I don't want, the way that it works is you really don't want to hear me repeating a lot of new things all the time. It doesn't make any sense. What I do believe in is that the community is a very strong community facing a lot of conflicts from their own youth, from their own ways of doing things, from the fact that we're only now seeing the second wave of elders begin to pass away and how that's attributing down. We're a young movement. I mean, Gardner has just gotten his biggest with Jason Mankey, his biggest, I think the biggest book yet out to consolidate that history. And that's what, 70 years difference, 60 years difference. So in a lot of ways, we're a very young neo-pagan faith. And because of it, we get into fights, we get into it. Plus, we have this tremendously powerful Christian national movement that's always moving against us. In India, it's Hindu movements and Muslim movements, but these sort of orthodox movements always coming against the other. And that's what we are. We're the other, regardless of how you identify us.
Hey, Ed, in the Witch Wars Defense Manual, Volume 2, the book or your manuscript talks about reputational warfare. What is reputational warfare?
And that's what makes this book so different. This is why I'm talking to a lot of the mainstream. So this is also going to be written for corporate and mainstream individuals. And is that the idea of reputation? What is a reputation? It's not what you do. You cannot control your reputation to a large degree. You can only help form it, create it, and project it. But you don't have a right. It's like cool. You can't call yourself cool. You can feel cool, but nobody can. You have to get somebody else to call you. Oh, your reputation is that image in another person's mind. Period. Your reputation, your brand. Yours is the Lone Wolf Show. It's a brand. As a pagan, the brand is all part of your reputation. And that is what mind share you take. Mind share. How much of a person's mind, their memories, their energy, do you take in their head, and what do they know you as? That's a reputation. And you can have a wide reputation. You can have a short reputation. You can have multiple reputations. But when you're doing this sort of thing, you have this sort of projection of your identity. Patrick McCollum, this heroic individual whose reputation is that he's a very good, strong person. Another reputation, he's a fine artist. You should see some of his work. This is a reputation and more of a brand than the actual reputation. They say, well, Patrick McCollum is kind. That's personal. They've experienced now that personal brand, and so that adds part of the that. Phyllis Garrett always puts on something that I'm pugilistic. I love her to death. She says my reputation is I'm pugilistic. It means I'm ready to fight. Yeah, it's a very fancy word, boxing. So you are what you are in other people's minds and how they reflect each other's into your mind. And very big movements such as celebrities have millions and millions of people who want to share, like Taylor Swift, who's now made it to politics, in their minds. So that's your reputation. Reputational warfare is when you want to take down that individual. How do you play the game? Which is, don't like using physical violence. There's just not a lot of it. So we are peaceful people. This is the biggest thing that I'm not saying. There's been some fights in the community, some physicality, but there's no sort of like murders in the community. There's no, no one's doing a drive-by shooting of a metaphysical shop. That's a pagan on pagan violence. We see it from Christians, but we're not seeing it from within our people. We denounce violence of that kind, the physical violence. We're peaceful people. We really want peace in the world. You'd agree with that, right?
Yes, I would.
So we're not. So since we can't use physical violence to find our ways around the community, and none of us have enough money to make a monetary difference. Well, a few people, but a monetary difference to what's happening. Using it in different ways. We now have to go to knowledge, and knowledge is where our reputation lies. What is the knowledge of a person? And reputational warfare is where you want to change the image of the target, you, me, whoever they want to target, in the minds of other people. What does it take to change your reputation in the minds of other people? And the greatest example of that, even while I'm finishing up this book, I was always planning on, is the combat between Trump and Harris, right? They're trying to destroy each other's what? Reputation. And we do it every day. And we've done it for hundreds and thousands of years. I'm just defining it. I'm the first person to define it as such. No one else has really gone out there and done so far. So this book is the first time you'll see it as one of those arts: reputational warfare, combat, engagement. So I'm very excited about that.
Ed, how do you build an honorable reputation on the World Wide Witches web?
I don't.
I don't.
I mean, what you think about me is none of my business is one of my big mottos. And all rumors about me are true regardless of the facts. My job is simply to do the next right thing. Period. My reputation is trash in some places. I'm hated in some places. Some places I'm loved. I can't control what you think about me. All I can do is do the next right thing and continue on. And if you support me, that's terrific. If you don't support me, terrific. If you just don't get in my way, that's all I ask. And when you get in my way, this is where this book comes in, Witch Wars Defense Manual. How do I protect my projects? Hmm?
So a few years back, on my own journey, I came into the narrative of what gaslighting is. Do you talk about gaslighting in volume 2 or volume 1?
Oh, gaslighting wasn't really that much of a term in volume one. In volume one, we talked about how do you use a lot of it has to do how do you use the police, how do you, and it's still available. Um, how do you use the police? How do you use the media, the non-internet media? It was written before the internet, so it had a lot about how to deal in the world of locality. Those from nationally, it was about locality. In this one, we talk about not so much gaslighting. That's a good question, but how do you get distracted? How do you get turned from that? How do you get false information? Because gaslighting is a little bit of a technical term, and I don't get much into it, but I do get into what they call false narratives, right?
Mhm.
And false narratives are very important. How stories that are not necessarily true, but we live narratives. I mean, constantly. That's what we do. Anton Wilson Raw said we all live in our own reality tunnel, and where they touch, we meet and we interact. Hmm?
Ed, has anybody in the pagan community gaslighted you specifically, causing reputational damage?
Oh, several times. Um, the last year and a half, I've been watching as a straw man has been attacked of me. Not really me, but fan fiction's come out. It's been glorious. Um, but certainly in the earlier days in Chicago, I faced that a lot where when was less able to counter things, it took longer to develop things. Oh, sure, I was gaslit. People they wouldn't tell me the fact that I was being put around by one of the elders as a cocaine dealer. He said the real reason I could afford what I was doing is because I was a cocaine dealer. No, because I was a paralegal, and Reagan hadn't really damaged my wages yet. Um, so I had a little bit of extra cash. No, so that was a big gaslight. I didn't, and people wouldn't tell me that. It was one of the first witch wars things that ever happened to me. 91, 92, 93, when I had psychic services and I was on the radio, that was happening. And the reason it was happening is I was finally prominent enough. I was doing radio at the time. They wanted to say, I was buying my radio time and they wanted to kind of just distract me. So they said, oh, yeah, he's funding it from drug money and that his circles have drugs in it. Absolutely not true. No police, nothing. It's nonsense. Hmm? But it happened. And people believed it for a long time. And there are a few people who still think that I did things like that. I'd be a lot richer if I did, but no, I didn't. Hmm?
Um, in terms of the wave tradition, one of the founders of the wave tradition of contemporary witchcraft has published a book, and it's pretty blatant that they're talking in a negative light, specifically for you and your family. Do you have any comments on that? And also the question above that is her priest? Is she from is she from the Carillion infrastructure?
Of course she is. Okay.
So
I love Stephanie. And let me go ahead and deal with the book first. The Grifter King and the False Church.
yes,
Love
yes,
it. I adore that book. I
you're a
think it's
fan.
funny. Oh, yeah, absolutely. I think it's funny.
Okay.
I think it's hysterical. I think it's fan fiction. I think that
Okay.
it is fan fiction. It's like, wow, I'm watching a show. I want to know the next chapter. I'm very excited about that Ed in that book.
Okay.
It's fiction. It's a largely fictional account, and I'm a big fan of it. And I love Stephanie. I love Stephanie Neal a lot. Let me go ahead and talk about Stephanie because we're talking about Stephanie Neal, and I do not recognize the wave tradition.
Mhm.
It's whatever she started after it. But
Right.
she worked her way through our system. She was a very important part of what we did. She was at the 2015 Parliament. It broke my heart that she wasn't there on the platform with Don and Phoenix and all of that. It was just a couple of months before it. I adore uh, Stephanie and been her coach. Did a lot of interviews with her, brought her there. I was looking for her to be the next chancellor of the Carolingian tradition back on February 14th. Um, Up until that moment, we had a lovely reputation. And I've forgiven her for the events afterward. But at that time, she decided to present a completely different face. I make it with the Laricos. So let me go ahead and mention. I see it in nature. Everything comes down to nature, right? There is a moth, a butterfly called a Laricos butterfly, and its caterpillar smells like a queen ant. And the ants take it in and feed it. And it feeds on larvae, and it lives there the whole time, pupates and everything, while eating the ant colony from inside a lot from the inside of it from alive. We fed it, we did everything else. Stephanie Neal was everything I was looking for in a high priestess. She did a great job as first priestess. But when she decided to take on the Corellian tradition, and she was supposed to be the chancellor, she turned into something else. And she had eaten out a lot of our teachings and our things of that nature. And so I still recognize her as a Corellian, even if she doesn't. She spent 18 years with us. And this moment that her mind broke is amazing. I mean, I cover it. It's part of the case study that I'm covering. It's the biggest part because it's the most documented case I've got of a witch war, elaborate witch war that involved people who actually knew the first book. They actually read the first book. So you see a lot of the techniques on it. So I'm able to use that fight to with Stephanie and everybody else in that tradition, the Corellian tradition. I've got emails, I've got all of that I'll be able to document and show you how that fight worked out. Not so much to relitigate it because it's over. I mean, it's over. But mostly so that other people can learn what happened so it doesn't happen again. You teach so you can avoid these things and make bigger new mistakes. Because remember, you can avoid an old person's mistake, you can make your own mistake. And that's the important part. I want people making their own mistakes.
Mm-hmm. In volume 2, you talk about the Corellian secession wars.
Yeah, so I call it so on February 11th, everybody knows Lord Don had a cardiac event. Yes. And at the time, we truly believed that another one was on the way. And Don and I had already made a path to leave the tradition's authority, the structure of leadership in other people's hands as I exited the parliament, because I'm on to my next thing, right? But Don had this cardiac event. We thought he was going to die. So we basically said, okay, Stephanie, you're going to be chancellor. Lady Stephanie Neal, first priestess of our tradition, would then become chancellor, which is an additional role that gives a lot of authority to actually operate the church. And we tried to get into the next thing 3 days later, right? 3 days later, I said, we need to call it. And she rejected the meeting that would have made her fully in control because she didn't like the fact that I was doing it. Because I had mentioned some things that I was going to do, and she went ballistic against me. I got out of the way. You'll see, I get out of the way right away because I love Stephanie. And she wanted to run this sort of thing, and I just didn't want to be in the way. So I pulled back right away, and then to the point of resigning on 3-4. What would happen next is a classic case of, and I'm going to go through it in the book, is taking defeat from the mouth of victory. She had it all. She would have been one of the most powerful priestesses in the world. She would have gone to the parliament. She would have stood there standing as our representative of over 300,000 people at the parliament. But because she wanted a form of control that nobody was willing to give her, and that's what we'll cover, a tradition utilized its own rules, its own energies. The youth who were in control of it were able to take back that authority and operate it even better today than before. That's what people need to know.
What's the biggest lesson from the Corellian secession?
You never know anybody.
Conflict.
You never know until you know. I've always known that. You never know until you know. Right? People in political positions hide feelings. They have alliances. They have friendships. They use family names. And that's what this is all about. That's where status. We love our status. We need our status. And having those credentials are very important to the real world. I talk about that elsewhere about why you need a credential shield. Like, do you have a press pass? Do you have documents? Can you pull out your clergy card? Can you pull out your press pass? Those types of things are really important. And a lot of organizations don't survive these type of fights, so that these sort of credentials, i.e. a Corellian clergy pass, would become less valuable if the organization is not around. So the survival of the organization is really essential. Um, so survival is everything. Again, I've said it over and over again, but if you can't survive, what's the point?
So yes, Stephanie O'Neill, I believe.
Neil, no, not O'Neill, just Neil.
Okay, I apologize, Stephanie Neal. I've had her on the Lone Wolf Show before, and we've had discussions in a positive light. And shortly after that conflict with Stephanie Neal, and shortly after, there were other elements in the pagan community where people started perhaps reputational damage coming from New Orleans and I think Salem. And I'm just wondering. It's kind of like the Shark Tank. If there's conflict there, it's like, hey, look, it's bleeding. Let's attack it. Now, what's going on here with this? I mean, in pagan media, I like to call it a Corellian split. But your narrative is definitely that it's a pagan parody and it's a humor book, and that's a really good way to think about it. But does the book itself do reputational damage? And can a priestess with a birthed new tradition go very far based on a published work that is baneful and pagan parody-ish?
Sure you can. I mean, okay. Absolutely. Yeah, of course you can. Look at Steve Bannon. Look at Trump. Look at all of the right-wing commentators and influencers who don't tell the truth, who do make up whatever narrative they want with bits and pieces of our reality. They're building a different reality tunnel. Everybody can build their own reality tunnel. And that reality tunnel can be sucked up by millions of people. That's something that people don't understand. And this is one of the things I'm constructing in the book about what is Google Stack. How do you build this tunnel inside the internet world that protects you, or at least gives you some place and platform to go for? As far as it goes, I mean, if you go back to Switch City Soaps, which is a way we handled how we did in Salem, we made ourselves public. The one thing I've always done is use pagan media as to keep myself above ground, so people always know where I'm at, so I can deal with situations, right? And so that's where my reputation is, and that's pretty public. I mean, if you don't know, I mean, you see it all the time. Salem. They fight each other, they get into arguments, that sort of thing. Sure. But there's money behind it. That's what makes it different. Salem and New Orleans is different because there's money, lots of it, from the tourist industry. And it makes those fights very, very different.
And are you the scapegoat of the Corellian tradition?
No. Not even the least bit. I was a straw man. And the difference is I'm straw man. Sure. I have I love voodoo dolls. I love poppets. I mean, I love those types of energy. I use them a lot to do various types of ideas. As a scapegoat, I'm not a scapegoat. They can blame everything on me because they have permission to. Do you know that is the first thing I did for Don?
Okay.
I take blame for the community. I've taken the blame for the community, their whole pagan community, for over 30 years. Ever since I was the pagan. So I'm always the villain. I'm always the bad guy to somebody. And if you don't have enemies, you're not being effective enough. So yeah.
Good point. Because if people are, would you agree that if people aren't hating on you, then you're doing something wrong? You're doing it right when people are hating on you and they're talking about you.
Early on, if you did not have six great enemies, you weren't pushing hard enough. Okay. And this comes out of the hippie movement. So the pagan movement is going in waves. And right now it's going into a new wave. The wave it's going into is really where the fight between me and Stephanie began. And that is the internet is changing everything again. And we had to rebuild the tradition, the identity of the tradition in the new AI world coming. She went ballistic. And that's where the fight really began. Because she said, very clearly in her fight was that I was going to change the tradition into my form. Well, no, I was just going to take it to the next upgrade. But I've done this a couple of times in the witch school. But people have been bad mouthing me. So I talk about in 2005 when I was in a big conflict when I was writing this book about the fact that I have the whole story about when I put witch school up for sale on eBay.
Mm-hmm. Any bidders?
25,000. It was going higher, but it ended 6 hours ahead of time. So we ended up not selling it, but it was a very important point. And so I've done things like that, and people today are still bitter over me over that. So yeah, if you don't push against people and you don't, as people like to say, it says, if your dogma's in the road, don't let it get hit by a car, by your karma. I do a lot of things that people don't like. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So the motive of book 1 was how to defend yourself with reputational damage. The motive of book 2 is the same motive.
No, it's how to win.
How to
It is
win.
now
Okay.
how to win. How do you get into these fights and win them? The last one was how to defend yourself, how to stop them, how to find unity in the community, and everything else. This is how to win fights, especially against the Christian right and Christian nationalists and people who would antagonists in the church who would divide your church. No more. No, this is
So
this is
would the manuscript be beneficial for somebody that is combating the Heritage? I think it's the Heritage Foundation Project 2025.
absolutely. It has a
So
lot of that in there.
So it'd be a good manuscript.
And it's intended. So I didn't realize the combat of the community. Right now, this book was originally being prepared and still is being prepared. People say you should brought out during the election. No. I'm prepared for after the election. This is 20 years later, and I talk about Christian nationalism. I see them moving. This book was started to be written before the Project 2025 project became public. I was raised as evangelical. I spent my first 14 years of life in the dominionist movement. Armageddon is a crime. That's been my motivation. So yeah, I've always, everything that I've done, the expansion of paganism, more radio shows, more things, bending First Amendment rights and doing all the other amendment rights, is to fight the Christian nationalist movement that's about to crash on us and try to take away even more rights.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, so the petty bicker in our pagan community is kind of like, why are we doing this when there's a bigger picture where there could be a lot more oppressive states or reputational damage then, where that could turn violent, where violence is non-existent within our community?
Yep. I talk about stoic terrorism, right? It's a form of terrorism where people like Greg Locke and other sort of Ralph Reed and some of these other religious come out there, and they did it just against the Haitians this weekend, if you're being very contemporary. And that's the idea that they commit some sort of crime. One group commits a crime that's offensive to another, even if it's not true. And this week was Haitians are eating pets in Springfield, Ohio. Yeah. It's the same as witches eat babies, or these sort of blood things that you say. They're not true, but they do that. So you have to combat that type of accusation. And if there's no freedom of press, you can't combat it. I mean, that's where my career has been. So yeah, we're facing a bigger threat, and we've seen it over and over again. And trust me, if terrorist war did not break out, people forget Bush was about to try to make Wicca not a religion. He wanted the IRS not to approve documentation. People forget that. That was in 2000.
That's deep.
In 2002, he was trying to have us removed from being legally recognized with his Christian right movement. And then 9/11 happened and it disappeared. They had another thing. But if 9/11 didn't happen, the first Bush administration would have had a conflict. And we just solved the conflict. It was the same area where we got the Veterans Pinnacle Association, Selena fought that. That's reputational combat. And the way they won it, finally, Beth Moore, who brought it to that sort of thing, that was an absolute reputational combat because guess what? The Bush administration did not want to see that be taken to court. So they approved it, finally cleared it, so they weren't taken to court. Because they didn't want it to court. And the reason why they didn't want to take it to court wasn't that they couldn't win or they wouldn't win it, is that more people would have learned about Wicca and witchcraft than if they didn't take it to court. Better to give them the pentacle than to have a public martyr. Rule in the book. People forget that. So we're facing it over and over again. And Stoic terrorism, as I was mentioning, I guess, when you go to a crowd of people and say, these people have no right to live, we should do something about them. They are looking for, and it's literally the parlance, and I'm sorry, the lone wolf. They're looking for the lone wolf, isolated community member. It's literally in the written of how the FBI and CIA track them down for ISIS and for other groups. But they make these big announcements, and they inspire someone to go out and do something. So Greg Locke saying there's witches in his church, or all of these people starting to make these sort of satanic claims, can trigger. We're already seeing it last year with Christian Day in Salem. Oh my God, the man had his circle in the magic circle of Salem, got raped by a cross, literally raped by a cross. And I say it that way because they brought a big phallic symbol in the middle of a goddess circle. And they rammed their way in. To me, that's spiritual rape. They committed this. And they sound press and everybody else did it. And they kind of, they went away. I don't think there were any suits paid. You see the protests. All it takes is a little bit more and they're going to be shooting us. Taking out their anger, capturing one of us and burning us in some sort of symbolic method. This is reputational, where it goes into warfare. When they say, you should burn the witch, and somebody says, I will burn the witch. Look at what happened to Trump. There's no connection to anything. This guy just wanted, fame, so he wanted to shoot a president. He would have shot Biden if Biden was in that sort of thing. People want to do dramatic things for various reasons. And some of them are sensible, some of them are irrational, but they happen. And there are other people that stoke it up to get that violence acted. And we see it in our community too. You do it every once in a while, but because we hate violence, you don't see these inter-violent episodes. What you see instead is something more difficult to deal with, which is reputation. Like, oh, that person steals, or that person is sexually harasses somebody, which we have to take very, very seriously. At the same time, we ignore it too. When Kenny Klein was in our community, let me go ahead, the convicted pedophile. And lots of people said, and I have like 30 interviews with him with major pagan leaders, the festivals would not listen. Again and again, the festival would not listen. And they went with the status symbol guy, who was just a great photographer. And when, the big thing is after the government arrested him and he pleaded guilty and he served and died in prison. So I'm not stating something that's untrue, that, people libel, slander, but this is true. We never saw those pictures. Yeah, it should upset you. And so, that sort of thing. But no one ever questioned. We never knew who the pictures were because the government shuts them down. So we don't know how many of our children may have been photographed.
One of the live viewers, I remember watching Christian and Brian's ritual being invaded, and it upset me so badly.
And it should have. It should outrage. It did outrage us. And, as we're going into the Halloween season again, this is one of the reasons why we write this book, because now the Christian right, the nationalists, a lot of different groups are going more physically violent.
Right. Yeah. Go ahead.
So, go ahead.
With the upheaval of the extremist white nationalism, Heritage Foundation kind of mindset, it could become very oppressive to our various craft families, traditions, orgs, groups, groves, however you want to call it. It could be very oppressive. And like you were saying, internal conflict within the pagan community is the majority nonviolent. Right. And with the extremists, with the white nationalism, there's definitely pockets of violence. And I'm also aware of like particular groups where they had an actual list of pagan leaders that they had on this list of like targets.
Right.
So I mean, it can be very oppressive. So on that light, I want to say, well, thanks for your the Witch War Defense Manual in preparation for an extremist pocket. So that's beneficial. And also I think it's important to remind the pagan community about that internal conflict, that it is nonviolent, that it seems non-productive. And
Uh-oh. Hmm.
we'll be back. We'll play a quick commercial and we'll be right back.
Okay.
Adam and Barbara are
ghosts. What's the good of being a ghost if you can't frighten people away?
Their house is being haunted by the living.
Maybe the house could use a little remodeling.
And they can't scare them into leaving.
They're dead. It's a little late to be neurotic.
So they're calling on Beetlejuice.
Beetlejuice, Beetlejuice, Beetlejuice!
Who's no ordinary ghost.
Yeah, you don't want his help.
Can you be scary?
What do you think of this?
Now, the party's over.
You want somebody out of the house? I want to get somebody out of your house.
But the fun has just begun.
It's showtime. Learn to throw your voice, fool your friends, fun and party.
Not bad.
This is amazing.
Want a cigarette?
Oh, no, thank you. Oh, yeah, here I come, baby.
He's guaranteed to put some life
Attention, keyword shoppers.
in your afterlife. Michael Keaton is Beetlejuice.
I'm the ghost with the most, babe.
All right, Lone Wolf Show, Ed the Pagan, Ed Hubbard right now, authoring a brand new book, Volume 2, Witch Wars Defense Manual. You can find it at CarillionPress.com. And yeah, Ed, so what kind of reaction do you think the pagan landscape gets from a book called Witch Wars Defense Manual, where those kind of subjects aren't really talked about it freely?
The same range, the spectrum. So certainly there's a lot of people who think that I'm just stirring the shit. Let me put it in brass tacks. They think that, Ed once again, Ed's stirring the shit. Okay, I think that. Some people, I've already had one, actually a little bit more than that, but at least one person threatened to sue me, not knowing what was in the book, if I talked about them. That's right. I'll leave that to it because I'm not going to give them the glory of their name to, just say that they're criticizing me. A lot of people get value from criticizing another person. I mean, if you're on the opposite side of a person, you gain the shadow energy of that person. It's a big part of energy. So if you're the person who's critiquing, a tradition head, and you're constantly critiquing inside the organization, always kind of building yourself into an oppositional leader, there's value in that. There's a lot of power in that, even if it's not good. Even if it doesn't go great, or it can go great. I mean, you can be then the most supportive person. But so there are going to be people who criticize anything I do, and otherwise, I've heard a lot of people say, "Oh, we need this book." And why did it come about? People started asking me about 3 years ago, "Am I going to do another book of this? Am I going to do it?" And I've been hemming and hawing, and then I just saw the Christian National Movement about to go it, and Project 2025 isn't what I'm fighting. I'm fighting the Faith and Focus group, ran by Ralph Reed, which dates back to that. Newt Gingrich talks about this, and he has a book, Rebuilding Civilization, that was published and driven to colleges. So Project 2025 isn't the beginning of this. It's how they're going to enforce what's already there. So remember, no matter what it is, and no matter who's the president is, the Supreme Court has now decided they're going to be the most powerful president in the history of the United States. We're electing Caesar, no matter which way we go for it, no matter who wins. And so those Supreme Court justices and the law is fixed. They're basically saying the president's immune. Basically, any president's immune to acts of illegality within the use of their powers. And we see that with war and things like that. But no, to give that sort of blatant control, oh my God, that's a whole new type of presidency, and that's what we're fighting over right now. And this book is about after that aftermath. I didn't know we were going to be fighting that hard for it, but I did know that we're going to be fighting. And it's look up Ralph Reed, look up Newt Gingrich. This is a 50-year movement. Project 2025, Part 1, public. Part 2 can be required too. Is about enforcement of it. How do we get? What happens when we get that pro-Christian leader? When we get that overthrow leader that will allow them to change the government itself? And it happens in Venezuela. It happens all the time. This is a very common tactic. We've just been immune to it.
And this on social media, in regards to posting about your book, it talks about name dropping or saying or exposing particular people within the pagan community. Did you name drop in the book?
Oh, sure. Well, I talk a lot about, with truth, about what happened in the Carolingian succession wars. I talk a lot, and I have a lot of positive things to say. Things that came positively from people, I did as well. So yeah, I do. I give credit where credit is due. And I mentioned that. What I'm not doing is there's not a lot of emotion. If you're looking for the big juicy, oh yeah, these are exposures. No, I'm not creating gossip for the sake of. What I am doing is analyzing these various, like I'm known to do. Everybody knows me as the question guy. So what I'm doing is really kind of laying out a book that answers questions about how do we solve this? Where does this happen? And I did in the last book. I mentioned all sorts of people that were happening at the time. Some have changed their behaviors. I mean, people can change their behavior all the time. But yeah, of course you have to. It also wouldn't be very interesting. And I also mentioned people outside of the pagan community too that they have done things. So sure, there are names that I've put in here. The succession wars is really hard not to have names and to be authentic. You talked earlier about the Grift Kings. The biggest thing that makes it so much fan fiction is the names aren't real. The names themselves are not real. Those people did not exist. They're supposed to be based on fictionalized accounts. So it's really a story based on the fictionalized accounts because the people aren't real in it. And so if I don't talk about real things, right, then what am I doing? Now, I do have some fictional characters, for examples, too. And I mark that they're fictional characters. So that sort of thing. This is an exposure of everything that's ever happened or relitigation. If you're looking for relitigation of things, go elsewhere. If you're looking how to not fight a battle in the future, this is a great book. If you're trying to make sure that your community stays solvent, because how do you win a witch war? You have the resources to continue after it's done. Really, the only way to measure a war is, do you survive it?
Good point. Longevity.
Yeah.
So within the scope of a particular witch war, which seems to be the Carolingian secession, focused around that, it seems like more of an internal witch war.
That was internal, yes.
What external witch wars do you discuss in Witch Wars Defense Manual Volume 2?
The Hubbard conflict. That was we were on 6,500 when we moved to Hubbard, Illinois with Witch School, 2003. That was the whole world. We went from 40,000 members to our site to 65,000. Dozens of press releases, protests in the street. Oh yeah, it was like that. We were threatened physically, absolutely. And then we went back and we at Gaia Thrift in Chicago in Danville. We're going to have the whole display of all the newspaper articles and all of that. That's very much an example. And we didn't talk about, because we were living in Houston, about that conflict while we were there. We saw how it worked out. I can now, because it's now way concluded, I can go into that more, how that worked. So yeah, that was the Hubbard conflict. Huge, Yeah, that was a huge conflict and made the news, national news, across the United States. That was against Christians. Oh,
Hmm.
that was a fun one. And we discussed also the other one that was important in this was how to we mentioned the fact of how not so much name names, but how groups have to deal with I mean, one of the ways is defend against pedophiles. We've seen that happen. We've seen
Right.
people who, especially the Karelian tradition in the past, we have when we didn't institute, one of the biggest mistakes we never did early was that we didn't ask. We didn't want the government involved with our business, so we didn't ask for checks. Checks on individuals. Credential checks. That sort of thing. It ended up that we would then, after some of the events of some of our members and their husbands, more of their husbands got caught for pedophilia. Which is the younger youth. There's a couple of divisions that got caught. I mean, and they went to jail and everything. We had to go through some actions, and that we had to basically, say no, we did not know about this. We took away their, the clergy, and we had that stain on us for a while. Did we, were we doing it? And the way we survived it is by putting good procedures in place. We improved. So even the worst case scenarios can be survived with patience and trust building.
And in volume one and volume two, Witch Wars Defense Manual, do you offer any structured spells or instructions how to defend oneself psychically or otherwise?
I talk a little bit about it in the first book, but it was really a psychological manual. This one's a lot deeper. It does talk about magic and the use of magic. I'm a big believer in it. The crystal web is a very powerful place for me. I think that there's a lot that we're doing mentally that we didn't understand 20 years ago that now do it. I think we have the internet. We have egregors. Oh, yeah. I talk a lot about egregors. I think that's very important. The first book is free at KarelianPublishing.com. Look up the manual. Towards the bottom, I have a link. That's one free. We'll see after the book comes out if I teach classes or if, I get, fleece alive. I mean, there's a good chance the community could just fleece me alive and just turn against me and just smash me into the ground. Yeah, and some people will try to do that. So as far as classes go, I don't know. Maybe the circuit or, the official. I've taught a lot. But it's eventually, so around Halloween, it'll be right before Halloween. And I think the second book will come out. First book's available. Has been available for 20 years.
So, Ed, you've been in a few different witch wars, and after the war, you still have steam to do something else within the pagan community. So, so the witch war seems senseless. It seems like there's a bigger picture.
They're not senseless.
Okay.
The problem
How
is
so?
Everybody thinks witch wars are senseless, and that is one of the biggest tricks of the trade, to make people feel ashamed and foolish so they don't do it again. No, witch wars are important. I've fought a number of them, and I think they're important because they have to deal with status and believability. Why does a liar lie so frequently? It's not because they want you to believe them. They want you to doubt everybody else. So any account of them goes against their lies. They don't care that you find them lying. You talk about gaslighting early. Lie all you want. I mean, it's not about having you believe them. I mean, how many people believe what candidates, politics is the old trope. You don't believe what they say, but how they make you feel. People will remember how you make them feel long before what you tell them to say, right? So they're going to remember how you made them feel deep in your heart. Did you make them feel like an asshole? They're going to remember that. Are you going to be nasty to them? They're going to remember that. So no matter what it is you're saying, if you go to them saying, hey, I think you can be a better leader. I think you can. And you go, what do you mean? He says, you're a great leader. I would like to offer this. But these fights are about surviving that so that people who are growing, who gaining more attention, more ability, right, continue to get resources. It is just like the political world of electing an officer, these sort of things. And it's a lot more fluid because anyone can make themselves in leadership. The most destructive one of these, the ones I want to stop more, is the ones against stores. Oftentimes people go to war against a store, 1 or 2, 3 stores in an area, and they go against a store, which is a person's money, sweat, blood, tears into it. And the warrior outside warrior just has nothing to gain or lose by it, wants to start a fight so they gain attention. You have to fight the bad. You have to gain the reputation, because one of the things I have more than anything else is that when we get into these fights, people trust me to help them through the fight. They may not trust me in peace. We can talk about that another time, but they trust me in war. That I have got, when I say I've got your best interest in heart and I give them things to do, they're able to carry it out so they can win, so they continue to have their resources. So it's not silly. They're dangerous. They're important. But we lie to ourselves and say, oh, they're not important. They're a waste of time. And it gives us good training ground. I mean, let's be honest. We're warriors. We're fighters. Fighting amongst ourselves just help us fight amongst the others when they come in.
In the scopes of Witch Wars that happens, just in the title, Defense Manual, do you talk about anything offensively in the book in volume 1 and 2?
Oh, absolutely. In volume 1, I talked very much about spy networks gathering information. I got into a lot of trouble for that one. That's one that people most criticize me for, is the idea that you get spy networks.
It goes on.
And of course you do. You have to gather information. And one of the criticisms that came out of that is that the Karelian traditions writings were plagiarized from other groups. That's how they try to use it. So they used what they call spectral evidence. There's no evidence of that, but they claimed it. In this one, I have a much more stronger one. I talk about not only defense, but also neurolinguistic programming techniques, how to scare people. I think witches need to use fear. Fear is I'm going to talk a lot about how witches need to use fear. Fear is what Christians and other people most fear us for. They're afraid of us. Mm-hmm. And how to utilize that as a weapon. Weaponize fear. We're weaponizing the Facebook. The world is being weaponized. We're in the middle of a World War III. The internet's being used as war. News media is being used as war. Everything now is a war. Everything is. You can see it everywhere. And pagans, bless their hearts, and I want to give them this, need to create pockets of peace. I mean, we're trying to do that. One of the greatest projects I hear all the time, can I tell you where I would throw all my weight if I had real money? If I win the lottery, I'm funding it, is the idea of a pagan city. I think, I think people who are talking about that, especially ATC, and have an actual plan with that, should be reinforced. If somebody tried to close that project down, I would stand there right there and stand between them so that they can continue their project. And then people bad-mouthing it. I think it's the most important thing to do. That's a use of a witch war. Like, why would I do it? So I want people to be able to defend themselves. I want people to fight back. I want them to protect more of their property. I've seen too many stores lose money. I've seen too many groups spend time, energy, and then break apart. Survival is important. Longevity is important, because then you get to amazing projects, and then you get to even speculate what a pagan city might look like. Isn't that cool? I love that.
Best way to find your book is KarelianPress.com.
Publishing, correct? Publishing.
KarelianPublishing.com. Is there a way to find volume 1 on that website?
Yep. If you go to the bottom of the listing for Witch Wars 2, it's right there. It's right there on the bottom.
And volume 2 is available in hardback, or is it just PDF at this point?
Oh, one of the nicest thing about today is that if somebody wants it as hardcover, we present all the books now as hardcover. The nice thing about on-demand printing, so we'll have both copies.
Okay.
And we'll also have we'll also have PDF copies. You can buy anyone who buys actual physical copy will get a PDF copy automatically. So, yeah, I want people to know about it. This is not something. So as much as you're going to hear about it, I really appreciate the interview, and I love your coverage that you've been doing off of your travels. I think that what you're doing has been pretty amazing. I love people who travel and the things that you're talking about. I'm looking forward more to hearing what you did with ATC. That looks beautiful. I've never been to Index, so I love watching that.
Much appreciated, Ed. So to our viewers, Witch Wars Defense Manual Volume 2, CarillianPublishing.com. You can get the first volume for free. Scroll all the way to the bottom page and be sure to check out volume 2 as we enter the year 2025 with all the Heritage Foundation propaganda and also internal conflicts within the pagan community that are decidedly nonviolent right here on the Lone Wolf Show. And I think that is one of the greatest messages during the show, is that we are a nonviolent people, even with internal witch wars that may or may not happen with things like reputational damage or writing the narrative. So Ed, if we can write the narrative with strong will, reputational damage doesn't seem to be able to grow very well or be effective. Would you say that's true?
So it's more effective, so it can be effective, but it's effective fairly quickly. People resign, people do drop out. But over the long run, you heal, just like from any other type of injury or wound. And you can do things that makes it better. So you heal and you forget it, just like you forget an old scar. You know, it's just, it flicks off. But but in the now of it, it really is painful. But over the long run, it's just like every other injury. You heal.
Any closing words, Ed?
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. I know that a lot of people will see other interviews, and I will talk about it. But this one, I really want to address, some of the energies of the community. And I think you're a perfect person. I think you're an up and coming interviewer. I really admire your work as somebody who's done over 1,000 interviews myself. I see you being way surpassing what I'm doing. And you got into the TV business, something that I'm really excited about. So yeah, I really think you're a cutting edge leader, and I'm really glad to see you there. So yeah, Lone Wolf.
Appreciate you, man. Keep it right here on Witchcraft TV, Lone Wolf Show.
And blessings, everyone.